Hey everyone, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are talking about disinformation because the US military is building a disinformation detector, and I want a copy of this. This sounds really cool, and I think the world could use it, and we will get to that. But here's what's going on. Now, this is coming from Defense One, just some really excellent reporting, and I'm almost quoting this article completely verbatim. It's really that good. But one of the biggest problems that militaries face today is the ability to counter disinformation. Now, a new software tool being developed for the United States Air Force, as well as the Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, may actually help change the tide of that kind of war. Now, Raymond Thomas, also known as Tony Thomas, he's a former SOCOM chief, said in an interview, and pardon my language here, if you don't compete in the information space, regardless of how good your operations are, your activities are, you will probably eat a shit sandwich of disinformation or false reporting later on. We certainly experience it at the tactical level. That was the epiphany where we would have a good raids, good strikes, etc., and the bad guys would spin it so fast that we were eating collateral damage claims, etc. So the information space in that very tactical space is key. Now, Thomas now serves as a board of advisors member to a company called Primer, who just announced a small business innovation research contract to develop software over the next year to help analysts better and ideally more quickly survey the information landscape and hopefully detect false narratives that show up in the public space. Now, Primal is using neural network technology that can scan large amounts of text and extract themes and other information based on the frequency and prominence of words and phrases. It's a kind of the sort of thing that can be useful if you have a lot of text you very want to quickly summarize into an accurate headline. This is a capability that they are now demonstrating as they develop this product. And to train their headline writing neural net, they're using, and I quote, millions of publicly available document title pairs, news articles, and headlines. And this is, again, according to the paper that they released on this subject as they just announced this contract. Now, this new contract will help Primer to build a platform, and I quote, to automatically identify and assess suspected disinformation. Primer will also enhance its natural language processing platform to automatically analyze tactical events and to provide commanders with unprecedented insight as events unfold near real time. Now, teaching this thing is going to be a slow process. There's a big difference between teaching a neural net to summarize a news article or paper to write a headline, or teaching it to separate fact from fiction. How do you train a software to distinguish trustworthy information from untrustworthy information and claims? Primer is planning to do this in the same way one might teach a child. You teach it to recognize sources of credible information versus less credible information. Obviously, that takes time. It takes consistent scrutiny, practice, and on and on. And basically, as it takes time and a fair amount of important data input from users and operators, essentially it will learn on what is happening here. Now, this is one of the first steps on tackling a larger problem, one that is only going to grow, according to Primer's founder and CEO, Sean Gorley. And he described how the cost of using disinformation is relatively low for authoritarian regimes that aren't accountable to voters or Democratic allies when they lie. I've actually talked about that here on this podcast a couple of years ago. I remember that. That's crazy. Now, you couple that with how quick and easy it is to produce and spread disinformation online, and you run into a big problem for which the United States and other militaries from democratic countries have little defense. And I quote Gorley, information attacks are cheaper to carry out than identity. There's an asymmetry here. It's much like an IED explosion. You can put it down very cheaply, but the cost of defending against it is very high. This is not something that's going to be solved by humans. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight if you're going to bring humans into this problem. And I think he's absolutely right. And I can look at the 2016 US election here to know that Russian intelligence, basically the Internet Research Agency, spent about it was somewhere between $120,000 and $150,000 just basically putting ads out, that would drive a wedge in specific voting populations. That's the amount they spent on Facebook, and other advertising platforms on that time. And that is way cheaper than having to send an army of operatives to change ballots or do anything else. And the IED is a perfect example. You can make a very cheap explosive, but you are going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars armoring your vehicles to defend against that, cheaply made, order it off of Amazon, kind of thing. This is a problem that we have. And when you have an authoritarian regime, the one thing an authoritarian regime can do that a democratic country like the United States can do is pivot on a dime. Meaning, if their leader wants to go one direction and use something, they will automatically fund it, spin it up, get it done, because they might be afraid of being lined up against the wall and shot if they don't. Whereas here, it gets thrown into committee and it is debated and all of these things. And by virtue of that, people are adding on amendments to the bill and everything else. And so we get stuck in committee, and 2 years later, we start developing that process. And I think that is one of the big differences that gives authoritarian regimes a bit of a tactical advantage in this sense. But in the long term, obviously, it's not good for the people. So that is a very interesting article here. I'm very curious to see how they are going to do this, because I think that these are the kinds of things that we need to have in a Facebook, in a Twitter. Now, they've been starting to ramp these things up in the last couple of months, but that is purely to identify potential false sources of information and then flag it to say, hey, this person posted something potentially false. I think that's a really good step. But I think it also needs to be taken one step further. The problem that we have, though, is what happens when you have an artificial intelligence with a false positive. Now, in the United States military, when you are, let's say, tactical on the ground, that could potentially cause lives if you have disinformation saying one thing and the AI says it's actually legitimate, and now you've got troop movement one way or another, or something along those lines. But to do things like clean up collateral damage, that's also a very difficult thing too, because while you might internally as the US military say, okay, we had an appropriate raid and nobody died, but let's say the adversary's disinformation campaign is saying 30 people died at a baby shower, or something like that. Their population is already trained to automatically distrust and hate the United States military or any military. And there are very good examples of this. Right now, we have a hot war, unfortunately, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's something I talked about this past Sunday in my Breaches of the Week video. And they are looking at this, they are taking this was part of the article that I didn't mention, they are trying to train their neural network to look at the series of information coming out from both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And that is a complete mess too, because the Russians are involved in that. The Turks are involved in that. There's a lot of different things. The Turks sent 4,000 ISIS fighters into Armenia in support of Azerbaijan. My God, I cannot speak today, but you know what I mean. And so this is a huge problem that Azerbaijan. Anyway, sorry. This is a huge problem that we have worldwide. And I'm not trying to make light of a conflict here between these two countries simply because I can't talk at the moment. I didn't do a video yesterday. I actually am just getting over the flu. But this is a huge issue, and I think it's something that we need to address directly and ideally just kill. And so the question is, how do we do that in the long term? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I think this is a good idea, not just for the military, but for the world. And so that is your news of the day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And Azerbaijan is how you pronounce that country, and I apologize. And that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.